billions of dollars that he was convicted of misappropriating out of that country's biggest bank. Bloomberg News reported in December on court filings that alleged that some of that money, some of that Kazakhstan money, can also be traced to Trump Soho. 3 Trump Soho condos that were bought in a multi-million-dollar cash purchase in 2013, all bought through shell companies, but traced to the family of that guy who misappropriated those billions of dollars out of that giant bank. So Kazakhstan story number 1, Chrome. Kazakhstan story number 2, that BTA bank guy needing to hide his money. Both of those stories end up with Trump Soho getting the loot, right? And playing a key plot point. Here's Kazakhstan story number 3. And this is the last one, I swear to you. And this is the only one where we get pictures of the president. This one also is related to that BTA bank, to the biggest bank in Kazakhstan, the one that got looted by its chairman. Another place besides Trump Soho where it looks like the BTA bank money went is here, in the nation of Georgia. Forbes and Adam Davidson at The New Yorker reported this out a few months ago. And the story was about this sort of, I don't know, it's sort of sad sack town in Georgia called Batumi. And by sad sack, I do not mean to be rude. It looks like a very nice place. It's right on the coast, right? By sad sack, I mean that it looks like this town was used for a stunt. It appears to have, it's a stunt that appears to have laundered a lot of money and made a bunch of money for Donald Trump. But they never actually got built anything because of this stunt. Part of the reason people were able to follow the trail of this particular story is because Trump himself turned up in Georgia, in this little town in Batumi, Georgia, for an amazing publicity stunt in the middle of this scheme. Mr. Trump was reportedly paid $1 million to show up and to lend his name to a new, certain to be very luxurious Donald Trump Tower in Batumi, Georgia. Now, this little town seemed like an unlikely place for that kind of a development, but miraculously, somebody found a ton of money to do this deal. Turns out basically all the money came from BTA Bank, which appears to have basically cooked up this whole scheme. They said they were going to build a Trump Tower. Trump showed up there in Georgia to make it seem like that was true, but they never built it. And it seems like maybe they never intended to. What the bank did was they funded a gazillion different small companies who were all supposedly going to have some role in building this new Trump luxury hotel that was going to go up in this little town. None of the companies had real estate or development experience. They all seem to have been created just for the purpose of this new project. And it turned out in the end that all of these new entities created and then lavishly funded by BTA Bank, they all turned out to be controlled by the chairman of the bank or people close to him. Right? And that was his MO. That was how he allegedly stole all the money out of the bank. He would lend it to fake companies, which were really just himself. You know, and then after you made those loans, last thing you'd want to do is fritter away the money by actually spending it to build something. So even though Trump showed up and got his $1 million fee to tour around the nation of Georgia and announce the location of his grand new tower, there was no grand new tower. There were just the loans which extracted money from the bank and put it, apparently, in the chairman's pocket. That's what happened to the Trump Hotel in Batumi. That's the reason there isn't one, despite what you might have heard about the grand planned opening. It appears to have just been a scam. It appears to have just been a way to embezzle money out of a bank, embezzle money out of the biggest bank in Kazakhstan, to launder it through companies and transactions that looked legit even though they weren't. And in 2012, Donald Trump got paid $1 million to go over there and help make it look real. So there's 3 stories about Kazakhstan. Of all the countries in the world, right? It's a random place to have all these different kinds of associations with the President of the United States, but they really do keep coming up. When the Fusion GPS transcript was released last week, honestly, the Kazakhstan stuff was my favorite part. Well, there are some contenders. It was among my favorite parts. This is from page 293 in the transcript. Quote, question, what, if any, research did you conduct that gave you any concerns about then-candidate Trump and any illicit activity? Answer, his relationship with organized crime figures. That was a concern. Question, and what can you share with us about the findings, your findings? Answer, there were various allegations of fraudulent business practices or dishonest business practices or connections with organized crime figures. There was a long history of associations with people accused of involvement with criminal activity. Quote, in the very first weekend that I started up on Donald Trump, I found various references to him having connections to Italian organized crime and later to a Russian organized crime figure named Felix Sater, the Bayrock guy. Sater, S-A-T-E-R. It wasn't hard to find. It wasn't any great achievement. It was in the New York Times. But as someone who'd done a lot of Russian organized crime investigations as a journalist originally, that caught my attention, and it became something that I focused on. All of that entered into my thinking when I saw that Donald Trump was in business with Felix Sater and the Trump Soho project and a number of other controversial condo projects. We began to look at where his money came from, and that raised a lot of questions. We saw indications that some of the money came from Kazakhstan, among other places, and some of it you just couldn't account for. Question: there was an investigation about money from Kazakhstan? Yes. And could you tell me about that and what you investigated and what you learned? Answer: there was some litigation in New York involving attempts by the government of Kazakhstan to recover money that had been allegedly stolen from Kazakhstan. Billions of dollars in a colossal bank failure. The name of the bank was BTA Bank. It's been well established in various courts that the government's allegations are basically true, which is that large amounts of money were illicitly removed from this bank, laundered across Europe and into the United States, apparently. Allegedly. So there was a civil case, at least one civil case, involving some alleged Kazakh money launderers. We learned that Felix Sater had some connections with these people. There's been media reports that the money went into the Trump Soho, or went into the company that built the Trump Soho. It was a company that Felix Sater and Donald Trump were involved in together. All right, so there's one last thing here. And then there's the part of it that's insane, that's going to make part of your day tomorrow at least partially insane. All right, the one last thing to know about all this Kazakhstan stuff in Trump is what it might take to nail any of this stuff down if, say, someone were investigating him for potential criminal liability on money laundering or any of these other things. If the president were potentially going to be in trouble for any of his business dealings involving all this sketchy money from Kazakhstan, how would that be proven? How would it be found out? Where's the documentation? Well, particularly on the stuff about BTA Bank, there is one thing you need to know. Remember I said the chairman of that bank fled the country and ran off to the UK and then France, right? After he left, who took control of that bank? Who took control of that bank, including all of its records, all of its files, all of its transactions, all of its archives? Who took control? The government of Kazakhstan. Specifically, the dictator of Kazakhstan put his son-in-law in control of that bank, which means if there is any problematic surviving evidence of any malfeasance or willful blindness or participation in these big, obvious money laundering schemes, right, if there's any potential criminal liability by the Trump organization from all its different dealings with that bank and with other Kazakh figures, records of those transactions would now be in the hands of, they'd likely be in the office safe of the son-in-law of the dictator of Kazakhstan. Guess who's coming to the White House tomorrow? I told you this is going to make your Tuesday weird. The dictator of Kazakhstan is coming to the White House tomorrow. He's been invited to meet President Trump at the White House tomorrow at noon. Really?